In the middle of a quiet Blue Ridge night, an elderly teacher heard the sound of metal dragging beneath her neighbor's yard. No one believed her, until K-9 Rosie refused to look away from a patch of cold earth hiding a forgotten hatch. And when that door was pried open, the truth stunned the entire town. A 6-year-old boy, chained in the dark for months. Inside his own father's home. On most mornings, Blue Ridge looked like a painting someone had been careful not to disturb. The mountains sat blue and still on the horizon. Porches were swept. Flags moved just enough in the breeze to prove the air was real, and the only sound on the main road was the low hum of pickup trucks headed to work. It was the kind of place where older folks sat on their front steps with coffee and said things like, "Nothing bad ever happens here," as if saying it could make it true. Officer Grant Walker knew better, but he let them have the comfort. His patrol SUV rolled slow past the hardware store and the diner, the windows cracked just enough for the crisp fall air to mix with the smell of old coffee from the cup in his console. In the back seat, behind the metal barrier, Rosie lay with her head between her paws. Her ears were relaxed, but one of them twitched every time a squirrel crossed the road or a dog barked from a fenced yard. "Quiet morning," Grant said, more to himself than to her. Rosie thumped her tail once against the crate floor. It was the kind of answer a K-9 gave. "I'm here. I'm listening. Keep going." Dispatch crackled in his earpiece, a woman's voice flattening the words with routine calm. "Unit 3, got a call from Willow Street, house backing onto the creek. Anonymous complaint about a child crying nights. You available for a welfare check?" Grant lifted the radio. "Unit 3 en route," he replied. "You got a name on the caller?" "Refused. Said she'd talk to you out front if you came. Older female voice. Sounded shaken." Older and shaken meant something had crawled under somebody's skin deep enough to push past embarrassment. Around here, people didn't like bothering the police unless their conscience wouldn't let them stay quiet. He turned off Main, tires crunching over leaves as he headed toward the older part of town. Yards were smaller here, fences lower, paint more peeled. It was the Blue Ridge the brochures didn't bother to print. When he pulled up to the address, she was already waiting. A thin woman in a faded cardigan stood on the sidewalk, hands wrapped around a chipped mug like she'd carried it out by mistake. Her gray hair was pinned up in the loose, practical way of someone who had done that same motion every morning for 40 years. She stepped closer as he got out, squinting at his name tag. "You're Walker," she said. "You had that noise complaint on Cedar Lane last year. You listened?" "I try to," he said. "You the one who called this in?" She nodded, glancing over his shoulder toward the 2-story house at the end of the cul-de-sac. Its siding was new, the yard clipped short, a flower bed lined up neat along the porch. The kind of house that fit more on a magazine cover than on their street. "I'm Opal," she said. Miss Opal, to most folks, used to teach 2nd grade over at Pine Ridge Elementary. I knew the boy's mama, and I know what a child sounds like when he's scared. Grant felt the back of his neck tighten. "Tell me what you've been hearing, Miss Opal." "Nights," she said, voice soft but steady. "Not every night, maybe 3 times a week, around 11, sometimes closer to midnight. It comes from back there." She pointed, not at a window, but toward the rear of the Mercer house, where the ground sloped down toward the creek. "It's not a TV, it's not a cat, it's metal, dragging, and a child." Her eyes shone, not with tears exactly, but with something like shame. "At first I told myself it was my imagination, then I couldn't sleep for thinking of what if it wasn't." He nodded slowly. "You know the folks who live there?" "Daniel Mercer," she said. "He grew up here. I had his sister in my class. Good boy, that one. Quiet, always trying to prove himself. The woman he married." Miss Opal's mouth pinched. "She's not from here. Pretty as a picture. Lila, always in a hurry, always on her phone." I asked her once about the boy, Eli. Her face did something I did not like, Officer Walker, like I'd asked to see in her closet. Grant glanced back at the house. No toys in the yard, no bikes by the steps, just a wide front porch with a swing that looked like it had never been sat on. "You did the right thing calling," he said. "I'll check it out. You hear anything while I'm over there, you call dispatch again, all right?" Miss Opal clutched the mug a little harder. "If there's nothing, I'll apologize," she said. "If there's something, I don't want to be the one who decided it was none of my business." He gave her a small, weary smile. That's usually how trouble sticks around, people deciding it's none of their business. Back at the SUV, he opened the rear door. Rosie stood up in one smooth motion, nails clicking on the metal floor. The cool air brought her nose up, testing scents he couldn't begin to sort. "Come on, girl," he murmured. "We're just checking on folks." They walked up the Mercers' neat stone path together. The doorbell was one of those polished brass ones that chimed instead of rang. He heard the notes echo inside, then the soft sound of heels on hardwood. The door opened on the woman Miss Opal had described. Lila Mercer wore a cream blouse and dark slacks that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage. Her hair fell in smooth waves over her shoulders. She smiled with the kind of ease that belonged more to cameras than kitchen tables. "Good morning, officer," she said. Her gaze flicked to Rosie and tightened, just a fraction, before she smoothed it back out. "Is something wrong?" "We got a call," Grant said, hat under his arm. "Someone reported hearing a child crying at night in this area. I'm just following up, making sure everyone's okay." "A child?" Lila laughed lightly, hand coming up to her throat as if the idea tickled. "Goodness. No, it's just my husband and me here. No kids. He's at work right now. Maybe someone heard the TV? I like those true crime shows." Her eyes slid past him toward Miss Opal's yard. "Some people listen too closely." "I understand," he said. "Still, I'm here now. Mind if I take a quick look around, just to clear the call?" That fast the air changed. Her smile stayed, but something behind it cooled. "Look around for what? There's no child here. We sent Daniel's boy to a boarding school up north last year. Best thing for him after his mother passed. I can show you pictures, if that helps." "I'd appreciate that," he said evenly. "And if I could walk the side yard while I'm here, make sure nobody's camping out back near the creek. Folks do that sometimes." Lila stepped aside reluctantly, letting him into a foyer that smelled like lemon cleaner and something floral. Rosie stayed at his heel, body loose but alert. Family photos lined the wall. Daniel in a suit, Lila at some charity dinner, a little boy in an old picture with a woman he assumed had been Eli's mother. None of the recent frames showed the boy. She led him into the living room and picked up a silver frame from the mantel. "See? This was taken last winter," she said. The photo showed a blond child in a heavy coat, snow piled high behind him, mountains capped in white. "He's doing wonderfully." Grant studied it, then handed it back. Snow meant nothing on its own. Anyone could put a kid in front of a backdrop. Right now, that wasn't his fight. "Looks like a nice place," he said. "You mind if I step out back with my partner?" She hesitated. "Is that really necessary? The dog seems intense." "Rosie's trained," he said. "She goes where I go. Won't take but a minute." Lila's jaw worked once, then she smiled again, tight this time. "Fine, just don't let her tear up my flower beds." The sliding glass door opened to a small deck and a yard that dropped off toward the tree line. To the left, the ground flattened near the foundation of the house, where a row of shrubs and a carefully placed outdoor storage box hid most of the lower wall from view. Rosie's whole body shifted the second they stepped outside. Her nose lifted, then swung low, pulling him toward the left. The leash went taut. "Easy," Grant murmured, letting her lead but keeping a firm hand on the line. She took him along the edge of the house, past the air conditioning unit, to a wide, patterned outdoor rug laid neatly on the concrete. It looked decorative, but he could see where the corners had been weighed down with stone planters, like someone didn't want the wind catching it. Rosie stopped dead. The muscles along her back rippled. She inhaled deeply at the rug's edge, then gave a low, strangled whine that crawled up his spine. Grant stared at the rug. "Lila," he called over his shoulder. "What's under here?" "Just storage," she said quickly. She hadn't followed them out all the way. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, shoulders high. "We covered the old access hatch. It's ugly. Spiders. I hate spiders." Rosie lowered herself until her chest nearly touched the ground, nose pressed to the very edge of the fabric. She scratched once, claws rasping on something hard underneath, then looked up at Grant, eyes dark and intent. It was the same look she gave when she'd found a missing hunter last winter, half buried in a ravine. Not drugs, not contraband. Something alive, or something that had been. Grant's hand tightened on the leash. He wanted to pull the rug back, drop down the hatch, and see where it led. He wanted to follow the dog. Instead, he heard the quiet crackle of his radio and Harris's voice in his head, reminding him of warrants and complaints and how fast a good cop could lose his job. "Thank you for your time, Mrs. Mercer," he said at last, forcing his voice to stay level. "If anything changes, or if you hear something yourself, you call us, all right?" She relaxed just a little. "I'm sure it was all a misunderstanding," she said. "Some people don't sleep well. They start hearing things." Grant walked Rosie back to the SUV. When he opened the door, she planted her feet, resisting, head turned back toward the house. He had to speak low and firm to get her to jump in. As he pulled away, the Mercer house grew smaller in his rearview mirror. On the opposite side of the street, Miss Opal stood behind her lace curtain, one hand to her mouth, watching his taillights disappear. Rosie shifted in the back, letting out a soft, restless whine. "I heard it too, girl," he said quietly. "I just don't know what to do about it yet." The afternoon sun in Blue Ridge had a way of settling over the town like a warm quilt. Most folks said it calmed their nerves. But when Officer Grant Walker turned onto Maple Court and saw Miss Opal waiting on her porch with a folder clutched to her chest, nothing about her posture looked calm. She stood stiff, like a woman bracing herself for the worst kind of confirmation. Grant parked along the curb, and Rosie shifted in the back seat, ears perked. The dog didn't bark, but she watched Miss Opal the way a K-9 watched someone carrying something heavy in their heart. Miss Opal stepped forward as Grant approached, her thin hands wrapped around the folder as if it were breakable. "I'm glad you came back," she said. "I didn't want to tell all this out in the street. Earlier, people talk." Inside her small living room, the air smelled faintly of lavender and old books. Every surface held something framed, drawings from children, thank you cards, faded class photos from decades past. Grant knew instantly this was a woman who had poured her whole life into kids who weren't hers. She motioned to the couch. "Sit, officer. I want to show you something." He sat. Rosie lay at his feet without being told, resting her chin on her paws, eyes lifting now and then to track Miss Opal's movements. The older woman opened the folder with careful fingers. "These," she said, sliding out 2 stacks of papers, "are letters Eli wrote me when he was smaller. His mama had passed, and I used to check in on him. We'd write back and forth. He was a bright boy, loved drawing animals, had the sweetest handwriting." She placed a sheet in front of Grant. A childish scrawl, rounded and uneven, filled the page. There was a picture of a dog that looked suspiciously like a potato with legs, but charming all the same. Then she placed another sheet beside it. This one was different, too straight, too perfect. as if someone had practiced an imitation but didn't quite understand how a 6-year-old's hand trembles when it writes. "That second one came in the mail last spring," Miss Opal said softly. "Supposedly from his boarding school up north. Someone wrote it in a hurry, trying to make it look childish. But it wasn't him." Grant felt something settle low in his chest, a quiet heaviness. "You're certain?" Her voice sharpened with the old edge of a schoolteacher correcting a stubborn student. "Officer Walker, I taught handwriting for 35 years. I know what a child's hand looks like, and I know when I'm being lied to." She shuffled through the folder again and pulled out an 8x10 glossy photograph. It showed Eli kneeling in fresh snow, a mountain range behind him. He wore a thick coat and gloves. His smile was small but present. "Lila showed me this," Miss Opal said, tapping the edge of the picture with a trembling finger. "Said this was from his school trip to Maine. But look close. The shadows don't match. The trees aren't even the right kind for Maine. I've lived long enough to recognize when someone slaps a child in front of a backdrop." Grant brought the picture closer. The boy's outline did look sharper than the background, almost like he'd been cut out and pasted onto Winter. "Why are you keeping all this?" he asked gently. Most folks would have thrown it away once the child moved off. Miss Opal lifted her chin. "Because I promised his mama I'd look after him. She was one of mine too, long before her boy came along. I failed her when she died. I won't fail the child she left behind." Grant let out a slow breath. "Miss Opal, I'll need to verify some things officially. Travel records, school enrollment, that sort of thing." "I figured," she said. "So I wrote down the dates, every suspicious thing, every missing birthday call, every time Lila said he was busy studying. I'm old, officer, not blind." Rosie stood and walked to the coffee table, sniffing the picture, then the letters. When she lifted her head, her ears folded back slightly. Not fear, concern. Miss Opal watched her and nodded, as if that confirmed her fears. "Dogs don't lie," she whispered. "They don't pretend everything is fine." Grant leaned back. "I'm going to take this to someone who can check things quickly, someone who owes me a favor." Miss Opal folded her hands. "Good, because something is wrong in that house. I hear his voice at night, Officer Walker. I hear him cry. Children don't cry like that unless they're alone." Her voice broke, not loudly, just a small crack down the middle. Grant stood. "I'll look into it today. I promise you that." Before he could reach the door, she touched his sleeve, just lightly. "If I'm wrong, you can tell me and I'll sleep again. But if I'm right—" She swallowed hard. God help that little boy. Grant didn't make promises he couldn't keep, but he met her eyes. "You did the right thing, the kind thing." On the drive back to the station, Rosie stood instead of lying down, her paws braced, her body angled toward the Mercer home miles behind them. Something in her stayed wound tight, like a wire humming with a message she couldn't speak. Grant didn't talk on the way. He didn't turn on the radio either. His thoughts were a tangle he didn't want to pull yet. When they reached the station, he went straight to the small office behind the records room. The door was half open, and Nina Alvarez, the youngest investigator on staff, sat hunched over 2 monitors. Her desk was a chaos of sticky notes, coffee mugs, and candy wrappers. She was 30 going on 19, brilliant but impatient, the kind of woman who solved puzzles for fun and complained loudly while doing it. She looked up. "Walker, you never come in during lunch. What happened? Someone complain about your parking again?" "I need you to run something," he said, dropping the letters and the printed photo onto her desk. Quietly. Fast. Nina glanced at the writings, then whistled. "Looks like 2 different kids wrote these." "That's the point," Grant said. "I need travel records for one Eli Mercer. And check if this boarding school has accreditation, a phone listing, tax filings. Anything." Nina cracked her knuckles dramatically. "Ah, the sweet smell of fraud. Gimme 15 minutes." While she clicked away, Rosie circled the desk twice, whining softly. Nina looked down. "What's wrong with your partner? She's usually Zen dog level chill." Grant didn't answer. He watched Nina's screens instead. After a few minutes, she sat back. "Well, I'll be damned. School doesn't exist. Website was built 3 years ago. From a template, phone number routes to a deadline, no exit records for the kid either, no flights, no buses, not even a passport scanned anywhere." Grant's jaw tightened. Nina lowered her voice. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "I'm thinking a lot of things," he said. "None I like?" She pushed the papers back toward him. "Whatever's going on, it's not above board." Grant nodded slowly. All the pieces Miss Opal had clutched so carefully were sliding together into a picture he didn't want to see. As he walked Rosie back out into the parking lot, the mountains looked darker than usual, as if evening had come too early. Rosie stopped beside the SUV door and looked up at him, tail still, eyes troubled. "Yeah?" he murmured, opening the door. "I feel it too." Grant Walker had been a cop long enough to know when a case stayed outside the cruiser and when it crawled into the cab with him. This one climbed in, sat in the passenger seat, and folded its arms like it planned to stay a while. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the sunset had slipped behind the Blue Ridge ridgeline, leaving the sky bruised purple. The kind of evening older folks like to call peaceful, though nothing in Grant's chest felt that way. Rosie hopped out of the SUV but didn't trot toward the porch like she normally did. She stood stiff at the edge of the driveway, nose pointed toward the direction of the Mercer house. The wind was still, but she tested the air anyway, drawing in a long breath through her nose before letting out a soft, uneasy rumble. "I know," Grant muttered. "I heard the old teacher, too." He unlocked the front door, but Rosie hesitated. Not refusing outright, just thinking. Grant had worked with dogs long enough to recognize when a partner was chewing on something they couldn't explain. Inside, he kicked off his boots and tossed his keys in the dish by the door. His house was quiet, the way a divorced man's home tends to be. The TV remote sat exactly where he'd left it. Yesterday's coffee mug waited patiently in the sink. A stack of local newspapers on the table listed nothing more exciting than a new diner opening and a church bake sale. Rosie paced instead of settling. She walked from the living room to the hallway and back, nails tapping a restless rhythm on the hardwood floor. Every few passes, she stopped beside the front window, gazing out toward the road as if someone unseen had whispered her name. Grant leaned against the counter. "You're spooking me, girl." She stopped pacing long enough to meet his eyes, head tilted, an expression that didn't need translation. Something isn't right. He heated leftover stew for dinner, but Rosie ignored her bowl. That alone made his stomach turn cold. She wasn't a picky eater. A working dog burned calories fast. Skipping food meant her mind was locked on something stronger than hunger. After dark settled in, a slow drip of unease began to grow. Grant tried reading, but he kept losing his place. He tried flipping through channels, but every show felt too loud. He finally stepped onto the porch with a mug of hot tea, hoping the chill air would clear his head. Halfway through the cup, Rosie pushed the door open with her nose and stepped out beside him. She sat, not at his feet, but facing the road, staring, not blinking, watching the direction of the Mercer house like she expected someone or something to appear on the pavement. Grant rubbed a hand over his jaw. "If you're going to act like you know a secret, you could at least share." She didn't move. He finished his tea, gave up on sleep, and grabbed his jacket. "All right. Come on. Let's go see if we can get this out of your system." The two of them climbed into his personal truck, an older Ford he used when he wanted to stay under the radar. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't run lights. He drove the back roads, headlights bouncing across the dark pines until the Mercer house came into view 3 streets over. He parked a good distance away, behind a stand of tall maples. Enough shadow to hide the truck, enough height for him to see the Mercer property through the gaps in the branches. Rosie pressed her nose to the windshield, exhaling fog patches onto the cold glass. "Stay," he whispered. She ignored him and climbed into the front seat, then onto the bench beside him, bracing her paws as she stared ahead. The Mercer house was mostly dark except for the warm, buttery glow of a lamp in the living room. Grant could see silhouettes moving inside. Daniel pacing, rubbing his eyes. Lila slipping around him like a shadow, speaking low and fast. It didn't look like an argument, more like she was controlling the conversation with precision. He'd seen that dynamic before, people with soft voices and hard hearts. Around 10:30, Daniel stepped onto the porch, phone in hand. He dialed a number, waited, then sighed loudly enough for Grant to hear from the truck. He tried again. This time, he left a voicemail. "Hey, buddy. Sorry I missed your birthday call last week," Daniel said, voice cracking. "I'll try again in the morning. Hope you're doing okay up there." Rosie let out a whine, long, frail, like something inside her recognized worry, even when a human tried to hide it. Lila stepped onto the porch, gripping Daniel's arm. "Honey, don't work yourself up. You know the school has strict phone hours. It's late. Come inside." Daniel nodded, defeated, and followed her in. The porch light clicked off. Silence fell over the yard. Grant waited another 30 minutes, watching the windows for movement. Just when he thought the house had settled, a new sound cut through the quiet, the faint scrape of hinges. The side door opened. A single figure stepped into the yard. Lila, dressed in dark leggings and a zip-up sweater, hair pulled back tight. She looked around in quick, sharp movements, then headed for the back of the property. Rosie's body went rigid, tail low, ears pricked. She pressed her paws to the dashboard, whining. "All right," Grant whispered. "Let's see what you're smelling." He cracked the driver's window and lifted his binoculars. Lila reached the rear corner of the yard where the slope dipped toward the creek, then knelt beside a square of old concrete half covered by fallen leaves. She brushed the leaves away with her bare hands, revealing the outline of a small hatch, metal hinges, rust flaking off the edges. Grant breathed out slowly. "So there is an access point." She pulled out a plastic jug from behind a bush, industrial bleach, thick and heavy. She unscrewed the lid and poured the liquid in quick, jerky motions along the seam of the hatch, like someone salting meat before cooking. The fumes rose, even from this distance, sharp enough that Grant tasted metal in his mouth. Rosie whimpered, shrinking back from the open window, nose wrinkling. Lila emptied the jug, wiped her hands on her sweater, then looked up toward the house. Her face was pinched, hard, nothing like the polite lady she'd been that morning. She pressed her ear to the hatch for a moment. Grant's skin prickled. Then, fast, she stood and kicked dirt over the seam, hiding the edges again. She slipped back toward the house, moving like someone who'd done this more than once. When the door closed behind her, Rosie pushed her head under Grant's hand, nudging with a quiet urgency. When he didn't respond, she pawed at his arm, a gesture she rarely used unless she sensed real danger. Grant swallowed. He'd been in law enforcement long enough to know bleach in the middle of the night never meant anything good. It meant fear. It meant covering tracks. It meant someone was hurt or someone would be soon. He reached for his phone, thumb hovering over Harris's number, then stopped. No warrant, no clear proof, only an old teacher's intuition, a child's forged letters, and his K-9 losing sleep over a scent she couldn't ignore. Harris would tell him to stand down. He tucked the phone away. "All right, girl," he whispered. "We watch, we wait, but we're not walking away." Rosie curled into the seat, eyes still staring out the window at the dark patch of yard where the hatch lay buried under leaves again. She didn't blink for a long time. The night grew colder. The world got quiet. And Grant sat behind the wheel, jaw tight, heart sinking, praying to God he wouldn't regret waiting for daylight. Janet. By morning, Blue Ridge looked peaceful again, but it didn't fool Grant anymore. The colors were still soft, the mist still lifting off the creek, and the air still smelled like pine and the first hint of winter. But the quiet wasn't comforting. It felt staged, like someone had laid a blanket over something rotten. Rosie had barely slept. Grant knew because every time he cracked an eye open during the night, she was awake, sitting, listening, head always turned toward the direction of the Mercer house. A dog didn't need words to tell you something was wrong. They were built by God to hear the things humans tried to ignore. By 8 that morning, Grant drove back to the station with Rosie in the back, leaning against the crate like she'd been holding her breath all night. He headed straight for Sergeant Harris's office. Harris was chewing on a muffin the size of a baseball, crumbs in his beard. "Walker," he said without looking up, "you look like you slept in a ditch." "Would have slept better in one," Grant muttered. "We need to talk." Harris finally looked at him. "Oh, boy." Grant laid out what he'd seen. The hatch, the bleach, the late-night trip outside, the forged letters, the non-existent school, the way Rosie had been acting. Harris leaned back in his chair. "You got any idea how thin this is?" "It's not thin," Grant said. "It's smoke. A lot of smoke. There's fire under it." "Grant," Harris sighed. "You don't have a warrant. You don't have probable cause. You don't even have a scream on record, just your gut and a dog that won't nap." Grant's jaw tightened. "You trained with K-9s. You know Rosie doesn't spook easily. You know what it means when she picks up a scent she can't ignore. And you know a hatch covered with bleach at midnight is never good." Harris didn't answer for a moment. When he finally did, his voice dropped. "Look, if you're wrong, you'll get sued flat. If you're right, you better be damn sure you don't mess up the rescue by rushing in blind." "I'm not rushing," Grant said quietly. "Not anymore." The station door opened at that moment, and Carla Jennings, the young child welfare officer, stepped inside. She was carrying her bag and a stack of forms, her hair pulled back in a tight bun like she hadn't slept either. "You're talking about the Mercer case, aren't you?" she asked. Harris groaned. "Oh, great. 2 of you." Carla set her bag down. "I read the incident notes. I read Miss Opal's statements. And Nina emailed me last night about the fake school. If that boy is alive and on that property, every hour we wait is another hour he's in danger." Harris rubbed his forehead. "I swear to God you 2 are going to give me a stroke." Carla stepped closer. "Sergeant, you know I grew up in a house like that. People kept asking for more proof, more evidence, more paperwork while I slept on a basement floor. You think abusers wait politely while you secure a warrant? That's not how monsters work." The room went still. Grant looked at her, surprised. Carla rarely talked about her past. She didn't use it for leverage. She didn't use it at all. But today her voice was steady, not shaking. The voice of someone who'd learned the hard way that cries from a basement never sounded loud enough to the people upstairs. Harris exhaled through his nose. "Let me get this straight. You 2 want to walk onto private property and open a basement door on nothing but instincts and an old lady's hearing?" "No," Grant said. "We want to walk onto private property and follow the strongest cadaver or distress scent my K-9 partner has detected in months. She alerted yesterday. She alerted again last night. She's still alerting." Harris glared at Rosie, who was sitting quietly by the door, staring back as if she were ready to testify. "Well," he muttered, "I don't speak dog, but she looks like she knows something." Carla picked up her bag. "We're not asking you to sign off. We're asking for backup, in case things go bad." The silence stretched thin. Finally, Harris stood. "Walker, if you swear on your badge that your partner is picking up a life-threatening scent, I'll classify the entry as exigent circumstances. But if this goes sideways, you didn't hear that from me." Grant nodded. "Understood." "Good," Harris said. "Now take that dog and get the hell off my carpet before she sheds everywhere." On the way to the Mercer house, Carla followed behind in her county vehicle. Grant drove slow, not wanting to spook the family or make neighbors nervous. Rosie, in the back seat, was pressed against the cage door, nose pointed forward like she was tracking something already. Her body vibrated with tension, not fear, purpose. When they pulled up to the Mercy property, the world felt too quiet. No wind, no birds, not even the hum of a lawnmower from a nearby street. Just a stillness that felt staged. Daniel Mercer was on the front porch, tie half knotted, looking like a man who'd slept on the couch and regretted everything. He frowned as Grant and Carla approached. "Morning," Daniel said. "Something wrong again? My wife said you were here yesterday." "Morning, sir," Carla said gently. "We received a follow-up to a welfare concern. We need to check your property again." Daniel's face pinched. "I don't understand. My son isn't even here." Grant watched him closely. That was the problem. Daniel didn't understand anything. "We won't take long," Grant said. "Is your wife home?" Before Daniel could answer, Lila stepped through the door behind him, wearing a soft cardigan and a smile that was too polished. Her eyes flicked quickly from Grant to Carla to Rosie. "I told you yesterday," she said, voice light but tight. "We don't have a child here. I don't appreciate being harassed." Rosie stepped forward. She didn't growl. She didn't bark. She simply walked past Grant, pulled the leash from his hand, and made a straight line across the porch, down the steps, around the side of the house, toward the backyard. Daniel blinked. "What's she doing?" Grant felt adrenaline shoot through him. "Following a scent." Rosie reached the slope behind the house and stopped. Then she began, pulling hard. Grant jogged to catch up. Carla followed. Daniel stumbled behind them, confused and sweating. Lila did not follow. Instead, she froze at the top of the slope, standing very still. Rosie dragged Grant down the hill and straight to the patch of ground where the hatch lay buried under last night's kicked-in dirt. The dog's claws tore through soil, scraping at metal. Her body shook with frantic urgency. Carla stepped beside them. "Walker," she whispered. "I know that behavior. She's not searching. She's alerting." Grant knelt by the hatch. "Everyone stay quiet." He placed his ear to the cold metal. For a few seconds he heard nothing. Then, faint, muffled, almost swallowed by earth. Clink. A chain. Being moved. Rosie whimpered, shaking. Then he heard it again. A breath. Ragged. Weak. Human. "Oh, God," Daniel whispered behind him. "What is that? Is that—" Grant stood, voice hardening into something cold, something certain. "Sir, step back, now." He looked over his shoulder at Lila. She stood perfectly still, not blinking, the color draining from her face like paint sliding off canvas. Carla whispered, "Grant, that's a child. There's a child down there." Grant reached for his radio, thumb pressing the emergency override button. Sirens would be coming soon. They needed tools, medics, backup. But he already knew the truth. He also knew there was no more time to waste. The chain scraped again beneath the ground, this time followed by a sound so faint he wasn't sure he'd heard it right. A small, broken whisper. "Help!" Rosie barked once, a deep, urgent bark, pointed straight at the earth as if it were pointing straight into hell. Grant dropped to his knees and made the decision that would change everything. "When you're ready," he murmured under his breath. "I'm going down there." Grant's fingers shook once, then steadied as training settled in, over panic like a heavy coat. He pressed his shoulder radio. "Unit 3 to dispatch," he said, keeping his voice level. "Possible child in distress, Mercer residence on Willow. I've got audible movement and a voice below ground. Request immediate backup, EMS, and fire for forced entry. Mark this exigent circumstances." Dispatch answered, calm but quicker than usual. "Copy, Unit 3. Units en route. 10-4 on exigent." He let go of the radio and looked at Carla. Her face had gone pale, but her eyes were sharp. She gave one tight nod. No one argued now. The time for arguing had passed. Behind them, Daniel staggered forward, his tie hanging crooked, his voice raw. "I heard that! I heard somebody! Who's down there? What is this?" Lila finally moved. She came down the slope a few steps, hands raised, as if she were the injured party. "Stop this," she said, breath quick. "You're scaring my husband. I told you, it's just an old storm shelter. There's nobody down there. That could have been a pipe? An animal?" "Ma'am, step back," Grant said, not taking his eyes off the hatch. "Right now." Her eyes flashed, something hard and sharp caught in the sunlight. "You can't do this. You don't have a warrant." "I have a child's voice and a chain moving under my feet," he said quietly. "That's all I need today." Rosie didn't wait for permission. She was pawing at the hatch again, claws scraping at the buried metal, head low, body shaking with urgency. She let out a sound Grant had only heard a few times in all their years together, a broken, aching whine that said, "If you don't open this, I will." "Carla," he said, "get Daniel back up the hill. Keep him there." Carla caught Daniel's arm. "Sir, you don't want to be standing on this hatch when it opens." Daniel resisted at first, eyes wide and fixed on the ground. "Is that my boy?" he whispered. "Please tell me that's not my boy." Carla's voice softened, but her hand didn't. "Come on, let him do his job." Grant ran back up the slope in 3 long strides, yanked open the back of his patrol SUV, and grabbed the heavy pry bar he kept for car doors and stubborn locks. When he reached the hatch again, his breath puffed in short, white bursts. "Rosie, back!" he ordered. She stepped aside just far enough, still right on the edge, trembling with focus. The metal bar bit into the seam where soil met rust. Grant leaned his weight into it. The hatch didn't want to move. Years of dirt and damp had glued it shut. He shifted the bar, pressed harder. Somewhere under his boots, the chain scraped again. Then he heard it clearly. A small voice, no louder than a breath. "Daddy!" The words slid under his skin like ice water. Above them, Daniel broke. A sound came out of him that no man ever wanted to make. A long, ripped-open no, no, that said he finally understood what he hadn't wanted to see. Grant gritted his teeth and shoved. The rusted hinges screamed. The bar popped free, then caught again. "Come on," he muttered, planting his feet. "You're opening today." With a final crack, the hatch wrenched up, tilting just enough for a slice of cold air to rise from the black below. It smelled of bleach and damp concrete, sweat and something sour that spoke of too many days without fresh air. He flipped the hatch fully open. A rectangle of darkness yawned at their feet, narrow steps leading down. The light from the yard barely touched them. Rosie barked once, short and sharp, then stood at the top of the stairs, waiting for his word. Grant pulled a small flashlight from his belt. "Stay behind me," he called up to Carla without looking. "Nobody else comes down until I say so." He clicked the light on and aimed it into the pit. At first, all he saw was gray. Gray walls, gray floor, gray stains. Then the beam slid to the back of the little room, and the gray broke. A small figure sat pressed against the far wall, knees pulled to his chest, ankles bound by a metal shackle bolted into the concrete. A chain ran from the shackle to the wall, slack in some places, too tight in others. The boy's hair was longer than in the photographs. His face was thinner, eyes sunken back, cheeks hollow. Dirt streaked his skin, lips cracked, but the worst wasn't the bruises or the grime. It was the stillness. He sat as if movement took too much courage. For a heartbeat, he squinted up into the light, like it hurt. Then he lifted one small hand to shield his eyes. "Eli?" Grant's voice came out lower than he expected. "My name is Grant. I'm with the police. We're here to get you out." The boy stared at him, and for a moment there was nothing there. No recognition, no trust, just the blank, tired look of a child who has run out of hope. Then Rosie moved. She eased past Grant's leg and padded down the stairs one careful step at a time. When her paws hit the floor, her tail stayed low, not wagging, not threatening. She lowered her head and crept forward, stopping a few feet away from the boy. "Easy, Rosie," Grant murmured. "Gentle?" Eli's eyes tracked the dog in a slow, wary motion. His shoulders shook once. His fingers wrapped so tight around his knees they'd gone white, unclenched just a little. Rosie let out a soft, throat-deep whine, a sound that didn't demand anything, just offered presence. She lay down on the cold concrete, stretching out on her belly, letting her front paws slide forward until they were within reach of the boy's bare toes. For a long moment, nothing happened. The flashlight beam trembled faintly in Grant's hand. Then Eli moved. His hand, small, filthy, shaking, left his knees and edged forward inch by inch until his fingers brushed the fur on Rosie's paw. He flinched at the contact like he expected pain. When none came, his fingers dug in, clutching her fur like a rope thrown to a drowning man. A sound escaped him, not a word, not yet, just a broken horse sob. "It's okay," Grant said quietly, barely above a whisper. He stepped closer, keeping the beam of light away from the boy's eyes now, letting the shadows soften the edges of the world. "You're not alone now. You hear me, son? You're not alone." Above them, on the hill, sirens began to faintly wail, growing closer, echoing through the trees. The sound washed down into the little concrete room, mingling with the boy's ragged breaths and Rosie's low, reassuring hum. Grant glanced once at the chain, the raw skin around it, the metal driven into the wall, and felt something harden inside him into a promise. This was no longer just about a case, no longer about reports and procedures and paperwork. A cruel stepmother had hidden a chained 6-year-old in a basement, and a K-9 had smelled the truth. Now, by the grace of God, they were going to drag that truth into the light. The sirens drew closer, their echoes trembling through the Osage pines, but down in the narrow concrete cellar, time felt frozen. The boy clung to Rosie like she was the only solid thing in the world. His thin fingers twisted into her fur with a strength that startled Grant. Fear gave children a grip adults could never match. Grant crouched beside him, careful not to move too fast. "Eli," he said softly, "I'm going to get you out of this. I promise you that." The boy didn't answer with words. His breathing hitched, just once, like he was trying to understand the meaning of the promise. His eyes, wide, hollow, too old for 6 years, flicked from Grant's face to the stairs, then back to Rosie. Every time he looked at the dog, his grip tightened, like that was where safety lived. Grant leaned closer to the shackle. It was thick, old steel, bolted into the concrete with hardware that belonged in farm equipment, not a child's life. The skin around Eli's ankle was rubbed raw, red, swollen. A dark scab trailed across the bone. The anger hit him like a fist to the chest. Not loud, not wild, just a deep, cold burn. He forced himself to keep breathing. Getting angry now would help no one. "Rosie," he whispered, "stay." The dog didn't move. She rested her head on Eli's knee, eyes soft, body still as stone. Grant reached for his radio. "Dispatch, Be advised, child confirmed in basement, chained to structural wall, conscious but weak, need cutters immediately. Before dispatch replied, a creak sounded from above. The cellar door, heavy footsteps, slow, measured. Grant straightened halfway, shifting so his body shielded Eli. He kept one hand on the flashlight and the other near his holster, not to draw, not unless he had to, but ready. Rosie lifted her head. Her ears snapped forward, tail going stiff. No growl, just alert, focused, dangerous. Then a shadow crossed the top step. Lila! She wasn't crying now. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't even pretending. The mask she had worn for months, maybe years, had fallen clean off. Her face was too still, too pale, eyes wide and hollow in a way that made the hair on Grant's arms rise. She stood at the top of the stairs looking down at the scene. The open hatch, the officer crouched beside the chained boy, the K-9 protecting him like he was precious cargo. And her expression said it all. She wasn't shocked. She wasn't horrified. She was cornered. "Mrs. Mercer," Grant said, keeping his voice controlled, "stay where you are." She didn't answer. Her eyes darted from Eli to Rosie, to Grant, quickly calculating. Behind her, footsteps thudded on the hillside, Carla shouting for medics, Daniel calling out, stumbling, frantic. But Lila didn't step aside. She took one careful, dangerous step down the stairwell. "Ma'am," Grant warned, "don't come any closer." Her voice, when it finally came, was quiet, flat, almost empty. "You weren't supposed to find this? You weren't supposed to interfere?" Grant steadied his stance. He could feel Eli shaking behind him, tiny tremors against his side. Rosie rose to her feet, muscles tense. "Step back," Grant said again. "Right now." Lila's hand moved behind her hip. Grant knew that motion. Anyone in law enforcement recognized it instantly. Not a gun, he would have heard the metallic catch. Something else. A blunt object, something grabbed quickly, angrily. When her hand swung forward, the gleam of metal caught the light. A long, heavy fireplace poker. Old iron. Pointed at one end. She rushed the stairs. Everything collapsed into a single second. Grant lunged sideways, pushing Eli back into the corner, shielding him with his body. Rosie launched upward with a sound Grant had never heard from her before. Not a bark, not a growl, but something primal. The sound a creature makes when it steps between danger and the thing it loves more than itself. Lila swung the poker at the same instant Rosie hit her. The dog slammed into her forearm, jaws locking around the thick muscle just below the elbow. The force of impact knocked Lila against the stairway wall. She screamed, high, shrill, but the poker went skittering across the concrete floor of the cellar. Rosie didn't shake or tear. She didn't need to. Her weight alone kept Lila pinned. "Rosie, hold," Grant commanded. The dog froze, teeth locked but steady, restraining, not mauling. Lila collapsed to the stairs, eyes wild, breath coming fast. "Get her off me! Get her off!" "You should have thought of that," Grant said, sweeping the poker away with his foot. "Hands behind your back, now." Lila whimpered, not from pain, but from the sickening realization that she had lost. Her gaze drifted toward the far corner, toward Eli, as if she still expected him to defend her, as if cruelty could earn loyalty. But the boy only curled closer to the wall, clutching Rosie's tail like a lifeline. For the first time, Lila's face cracked. A flicker of something ugly, anger, hatred, flashed there, fast and sharp. "You ruined everything," she hissed. Grant moved up the stairs, cuffs in hand. "No, ma'am." "You did." The moment he snapped the cuffs onto her wrists, the cellar filled with new light. Bright beams from helmets as the fire crew arrived, heavy boots stomping down the slope, voices echoing through the open hatch. "In here!" Carla shouted from above. "He found the boy." Tools clattered against the concrete. Firefighters squeezed into the narrow pit, their gear making the room feel even smaller. Eli flinched at the noise, burying his face into Rosie's side. Rosie lay down, curling her body around him, letting him hide there in the soft dark between her ribs and the floor. "It's okay, buddy," Grant whispered. "It's loud, I know, but they're here to help you. They're the good guys." One firefighter, a broad man with soot already on his sleeves, knelt beside them with a hydraulic cutter. "Let's get this chain off him." Grant nodded, placing his hands gently over Eli's ears. "Cover your ears, sweetheart," he murmured. "It's going to be loud, but loud can be good." The cutter clamped around the thick steel link. The machine whined, growing in pitch, the sound sharp and angry. Eli whimpered, gripping Rosie as if he might disappear without her. Then, crack! The metal snapped clean in two. The chain fell to the ground. Silence followed, heavy and stunned, like the world itself had paused to acknowledge what had finally broken. Eli stared at his freed ankle. He moved his foot slowly, just an inch, as if afraid the chain would yank it back. When it didn't, a quiet gasp left his chest. Not a cry, not a word, just a tiny sound of disbelief. Grant swallowed hard. Carla wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Even the firefighter looked away, jaw flexing. "Let's get him out of here," Grant said softly. He wrapped Eli in his own jacket, lifting him with steady, gentle arms. The boy was shockingly light. Too light, like carrying a bundle of sticks wrapped in skin. Rosie stayed glued to his side all the way up the steps, refusing to let even an inch come between them. When the morning sun hit Eli's face, he hid instantly, small hands reaching blindly for Rosie. She pressed herself against him, sheltering him with her body. And as the medics hurried in, as neighbors whispered in horror, as Lila shrieked curses while being loaded into a patrol car. Eli didn't look at any of them. He didn't need to. He had found the only two faces in the world he trusted: Officer Grant and Rosie. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of sirens and fluorescent lights reflecting off the back window. Grant sat in the ambulance beside the stretcher, his knees almost touching the thin metal rails. Eli lay there, small body swallowed by blankets, IV line taped to his bruised arm. His eyes stayed half-lidded, watching nothing. Rosie rode in the back of Grant's cruiser, following close behind. Every time the ambulance slowed, she shifted forward, as if sheer will might push it faster. At Asheville General, the world shrank down to white walls and soft-soled shoes. Nurses moved quickly but gently, talking in low voices. An older nurse with silver hair took one look at Eli and squeezed Grant's arm once, like a mother saying what words couldn't. "Let's get him to pediatrics," she said. "Dr. Hayes is already on his way." They wheeled Eli down a long hallway decorated with faded murals of cartoon animals and balloons. The pictures had been painted to comfort children, but the boy on the stretcher didn't look at them. His gaze stayed fixed on the ceiling, blinking slowly whenever a light passed overhead. "Can the dog come in?" Grant asked. "Not yet," the nurse said softly. "We need to get him stabilized first. Your partner will have to wait." Partner? The word felt too small for what Rosie was, at that moment, sitting alone in the car, nose pressed against the cracked back window as the automatic doors swallowed Eli from sight. In the exam room, Dr. Hayes, a tired man with kind eyes, did his work. He checked Eli's vital signs, studied the bruises, the sores on his ankles, the way he flinched whenever someone reached too fast. He spoke in a gentle drawl that seemed older than his face. "Malnourished?" he murmured to the nurse, not quite whispering, but not loud enough for the boy to hear. "Dehydration, some healing fractures. This didn't start last week." Grant stood in the corner, hands fisted in his pockets, feeling each word like a verdict. "Is he talking at all?" Hayes asked. "No," Grant said. He spoke when we first opened the hatch, just a word or two. Nothing since." "That's common," the doctor replied. "Shock, trauma. Children shut down when the world stays wrong too long." He leaned closer to Eli. "Hey there, buddy. My name's Sam. I'm just going to listen to your heart, all right? No needles right now? No shots." Eli's eyes flickered vaguely in his direction, then away. He didn't answer. His lips barely moved. They cleaned him up, slowly, carefully, warm water over chilled skin, clean gown replacing the rags he'd been living in. Every time someone touched his ankle, he flinched, then froze, like a small animal trying not to be seen. When they were done, the nurse pulled a soft blanket up to his chin. "You're safe now, sweetheart," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Grant stepped out into the hallway, the door closing softly behind him. Carla was waiting on a plastic chair, her elbows on her knees, head in her hands. When she saw him, she stood. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad," he said simply. "But he's alive. That's more than we had this morning." She nodded, blinking hard. "I checked on Daniel," she said quietly. "Harris has him in holding till they sort charges. He keeps asking the same question. Did he know I was there? Did he know I was in the house?" "What did you tell him?" Grant asked. "I told him the truth," she said, "that the boy doesn't understand anything right now except pain and light and voices he doesn't trust." They fell silent as a social worker walked past with a clipboard, then an orderly pushing a cart. Life went on, even in there. It always did. "Can Rosie come in?" Carla asked. "Not yet," Grant said. "Hospital rules." He went outside to check on his partner. She sat in the back of the cruiser, exactly where he'd left her, but she'd worn a patch of fog onto the window from breathing against it. When she saw him, her tail thumped once, but there was no joy in it, just relief. He opened the door. "He's upstairs," he murmured, rubbing her ears. "They've got him hooked up to all kinds of things. You did good, girl. You found him." Rosie licked his hand once, then looked past him toward Nee. The building, ears pricked. "Not yet," he repeated. "I'm sorry. Not yet." Hours turned into days. Eli stayed in the pediatric wing, in a room painted with blue clouds. He ate when they coaxed him, drank when they patiently tipped cups to his mouth, but he didn't speak. He didn't cry. He didn't laugh. He lay in bed, eyes drifting to the door whenever footsteps passed, then away again. Sometimes he startled awake at night, breathing fast, eyes wild. Then he'd see the ceiling and the dull hospital light and sink back into the pillows as if nothing could possibly be worse than where his mind still was. A child psychologist came and went, soft voice, patient questions. "He's not refusing to talk," she told Grant and Carla one afternoon in the hallway. "His brain is protecting him. It's as if someone hit a switch and shut some things off so he could survive. We have to be gentle flipping those switches back." Grant nodded, though his fingers dug into his own palm. That night, he sat at his kitchen table with Rosie at his feet and went over every report, every photo, every timeline. But his mind kept circling back to the image of Eli's hand buried in Rosie's fur. "He trusted you," Grant said softly, looking down at the dog. "More than any of us. Maybe more than he ever trusted any human." Rosie raised her head, brown eyes steady. The next morning, Carla found him in the hospital cafeteria with a paper cup of bad coffee and a face that said he'd made up his mind. "I'm going to ask them to let Rosie in," he said. Carla blinked. "You know they're going to say no." "They can say no the first time," he replied. "They can say no the second time. Eventually, someone with enough heart or enough sense is going to say yes." It took calls. It took forms. It took explaining to a hospital administrator what a K-9 was trained to do, how Rosie wouldn't jump on the bed or chew wires or scare patients. It took the older nurse with the silver hair stepping in and saying quietly but firmly, "Sometimes what a child needs most is not a doctor. It's a dog." By late afternoon, they had their answer. 15 minutes, the administrator said. One visit. If it upsets the boy, the dog leaves. If it helps, we'll discuss another. Grant signed the papers with a hand that didn't quite feel like his own. When he brought Rosie through the side entrance, every head turned. Big working dogs didn't usually walk hospital corridors, but she walked at heel, calm, alert, as if she understood the gravity of the invitation. Outside Eli's room, Grant knelt, placing a hand on her chest. "Gentle," he murmured. "He's been hurt. You remember him. You remember his smell. Just be near him. Let him come to you." Rosie's tail flicked once. She pressed her nose to his wrist, then turned her head toward the door. The nurse opened it, stepping back. "He's awake," she whispered. "But he hasn't said a word all day." The room was dim, blinds half drawn, machines humming softly. Eli lay on his side, facing the window, small back curved under the blankets. Rosie's tags jingled quietly as she walked in. The sound made Eli's shoulder twitch. He didn't roll over yet, but one hand crept out from under the blanket, fingers clutching at the air. Rosie stopped a few feet from the bed, laying down slowly, making herself small. She stretched out on the floor with her head resting near the mattress, close enough for him to reach if he wanted. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then Eli turned his head. His eyes found the dog. Recognition flared there, weak but real. His fingers wavered, then dropped down, searching blindly until they brushed the top of her head. Rosie let out a little huff, closing her eyes as if to say, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Grant stood near the door, throat tight. Eli's mouth trembled, his lips parted. At first it seemed like he might just be breathing hard. Then a sound came out, not loud, not clear. But it was a word, reaching across the distance between basement and hospital, between terror and something like safety. "Rosie." The name scraped out of his throat like it had rocks tied to it. The effort seemed to break something loose inside him. His face crumpled, his chest hitched, and then, finally, mercifully, the boy began to cry. It wasn't a nice cry. It wasn't a neat cry. It came in jagged waves, years of fear and loneliness squeezing out through a small, battered body. Tears soaked the pillow. Little hands clutched at Rosie's fur as if she were the only proof that he was not still 6 feet underground. Rosie bore it all, pressed against the bed, letting his fingers dig in, letting his tears fall hot on her head. She didn't move away. She didn't shake him off. Grant turned his face slightly, blinking hard, pretending he needed to study the heart monitor. Carla, standing in the doorway, pressed a tissue to her eyes. The nurse beside her just whispered, "Thank you," under her breath, to whoever might be listening. The first cry in that hospital room sounded like breaking, but to everyone who heard it, it also sounded like something else, the beginning of a little boy finding his way back. Chandi. Summer crept slowly into the mountains that year, as if even the seasons knew they needed to go gentle with Blue Ridge for a little while. The worst part of the story had already been dragged from the darkness, but healing, real healing, moved at its own quiet pace. 3 months had passed since the night they opened the hatch. 3 months of doctor's visits, therapy sessions, paperwork, interrogations, court hearings, and whispered prayers in the corners of hospital rooms. 3 months of watching a boy learn to live above ground again. For Eli, the world had grown a little bigger every week. His new room at Aunt Clara's house was painted light blue with a small bookshelf full of picture books Miss Opal donated from her teaching days. There were warm lamps instead of bare bulbs, soft rugs instead of concrete, windows he could open whenever he wanted. And every night, before sleep, Clara left the door open so he could see the hallway light, just to remind him he was not locked away. Even so, the journey was slow. He talked sometimes, but only in short pieces, small phrases. He smiled, but not often. He slept through most nights, but every so often the past reached out and shook him awake. When that happened, Rosie's name was usually the first sound she heard when Aunt Clara dialed Grant and asked if the dog could come over. Grant never said no, and Rosie never hesitated. Today, though, was different. Today, for the first time since the rescue, Eli had asked to go outside somewhere that wasn't a hospital or a backyard. The request had startled Clara so much she'd called Grant immediately. "He said he wants to go to the park," she whispered, "and he asked if Rosie would come. He wants to try throwing a ball." Grant didn't waste a second. "We'll be there in 20 minutes. Now, standing at the edge of the small town park, Grant watched Eli sit cross-legged in the grass near an old oak tree. Rosie lay beside him, head resting on his knee. The boy's hair had been trimmed, his cheeks less sunken, his skin no longer gray from lack of light. He wore sneakers that still looked too big on him and a T-shirt with a faded cartoon dog printed on the front. Clara said he picked it out himself. The park was quiet, mostly filled with older folks who liked to take evening walks. A couple sat on a nearby bench holding hands. A man with a cane fed sparrows by the path. The place had the soft hush of somewhere built to give people their breath back. Clara stood a few feet away, arms folded, smiling nervously as if she were afraid to jinx the moment. "You ready, buddy?" Grant asked, stepping closer. Eli nodded once. His hands trembled a little, but not like before. This was nervous excitement, not fear. He looked to Rosie, and the dog lifted her head, ears perked, tail thumping the ground. Grant knelt beside him and held out a bright yellow tennis ball. "You remember how I showed you last week? Just like we practiced. Doesn't need to go far." Eli bit his lower lip, studying the ball. Then he looked up at Grant. Really looked, not that side glance of a child bracing for harm, but the steady look of someone deciding to trust. He reached for the ball, palm small against the bright rubber. He weighed it in his hand, then drew in a breath like a diver about to jump. Rosie was already standing now, tail high, ready. Eli lifted his arm. The motion was stiff, but he pushed through it and sent the ball sailing, maybe 6 feet, maybe 7, but far enough that Rosie had to take a few quick strides to reach it. She pounced, snatched the ball up, then trotted back with her whole body wagging. Eli's face changed. First, a blink, then a twitch near his mouth, then, like watching dawn climb a mountain, light spread across his expression. A real smile. Not the faint, polite one he'd given doctors. Not the nervous one he'd tried for Clara. A smile that cracked wide open, full of something brand new. Joy. He giggled. Actually giggled. The sound startled him, and he giggled again because of that. He covered his face with his hands, peeking out between his fingers as Rosie nudged the ball back into his lap. "Good girl," he whispered, the words small but clear. Grant felt something hitch in his chest. He stood quickly and looked away so Clara wouldn't see the emotion gathering in his eyes. But she saw it anyway and laid a hand on his arm. "He's coming back," she said quietly, "little pieces at a time." "Yeah," Grant said, clearing his throat. "He sure is." They watched from the shade as Eli threw the ball again. And again, each toss a little farther, each return bringing another small burst of laughter from the boy who hadn't made a sound in that basement except a whisper of fear. Rosie played gently, never bumping him too hard, never demanding more than he could give. She watched him like she had watched him that night underground, as if her sole purpose on earth was to stay close enough to catch him if he fell. When Eli finally grew tired, he rested against the trunk of the oak tree. Rosie curled beside him, and he leaned his head onto her shoulder like he was settling into a pillow made just for him. Grant walked over and sat on the grass. Clara sat on the other side. A triangle of quiet safety around one small life. After a few minutes, Eli looked up at Grant and spoke in a soft, serious voice. You came for me?" "I did," Grant answered gently. "And I'd do it again 1,000 times." The boy nodded, accepting that like a fact of nature. "And Rosie, she found me." Grant smiled. "She did. She's the best partner a man could ask for." Eli stroked the top of Rosie's head. "She's my best friend." Rosie licked his cheek once, sealing the claim. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the park. Somewhere nearby, wind chimes rattled on a porch. A couple birds chased one another through branches above, shaking down bits of sunlight. Grant leaned back on his hands. He didn't need to say anything. The moment didn't ask for words. Later, the courts would announce the sentences. Lila would go away for longer than Eli would ever need to remember her. Daniel would lose his rights, but not his regret. Miss Opal would continue baking muffins for Eli on Thursdays because she insisted children healed better on full stomachs. And Carla would check in every week, though not because the job told her to, because she wanted to. But here, under the oak tree, none of that mattered. What mattered was a boy who had lived in darkness, now learning how to live in the light. What mattered was the sound of laughter rising where fear had once been. What mattered was the dog who had smelled the truth when no one else dared to look for it. As the sky turned orange, Eli picked up the ball again. "Rosie," he said softly, lifting his arm for another throw. "Go get it." And Rosie, faithful as ever, bounded into the fading daylight, ready to chase whatever future waited for them. If this story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop a simple 1 or 0 in the comments so I know you're here with us tonight. Your voice helps these stories live on. And if you'd like to join me for the next gentle K-9 story, the next moment of courage, loyalty, or quiet healing, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories waiting for you. I'll see you in the next one.